Okay, guys. My name is Alex. I'm working in Data Art. It's a big outsourcing company. In my free time, I contribute in open source, speak on conferences, meetups, and participate in small different projects, particularly mine. You can find a little bit information about me on this website. And also I created a short one because Slavic names are complicated. They were created to punish all other nations. So this website just contains links to my social networks because my Twitter handle also is as complicated as possible. So sorry for that, guys. Today, I'm gonna talk about Koa.js, about Node.js and building real applications on it. And you know, guys, every time I do the same mistake. I think like, well, I know JavaScript, so I can use it everywhere. Like, well, because it's JavaScript, so we can work with microcontrollers with JavaScript. We can create native applications for mobile devices with JavaScript. We can create desktop applications with JavaScript, and of course, write backend with JavaScript. I mean, all those tasks were originally not about JavaScript, but we have our own hands and we're trying to steal others' work. So agenda is pretty simple. I will start from what Koa is, and afterwards I'll talk about pitfalls you'll face working with that. 2 years ago I gave a talk. It was about how cool Koa is. I was very young and I thought it really is. We started working on big projects. Idea was to create some service to share a screen, communicate between teams. And because I had some knowledge of WebRTC, I decided to choose Node.js and have the same JavaScript everywhere. And I had some experience with Express.js. I didn't like it. And I wanted to improve my experience with Koa. I thought it's gonna be better, you know. So first of all, when I came to my team and said, guys, let's try Koa, they weren't happy, literally, and they asked me to prove what Koa is. I went to them and said, like, well, guys, you can see like here Google Trends, and here's very active GitHub repository. Koa is created by creators of Express, and they told like, okay, guys, we've written some shit, and now you should use Koa instead of our Express framework. However, since some time we can see other results. So it haven't become popular at all. So we have the same popularity of framework as it was before. Actually, it can be a sign that we lost some hype around Node.js infrastructure, and looks like people realized where it's useful, where it isn't. So actually, I mean, the same dynamic is applicable for Express either. And overall, our ecosystem looks like this one. So nothing is really changing too much during the last 4 years. So we can take a look at Koa.js repository, and it looks like it's literally dying. But for some particular reason, I'm staying here and talking about it. So what's Koa? Koa.js isn't actually a framework. It's an engine of middlewares, and it is the only thing it provides to you. So there is no any routing inside, there is no template engine inside, no security and HTTP utilities inside. So just a middleware core and simple web server. So that's it. And it was one of the reasons why I have chosen it. I thought like I'll have the whole control on my application and it's gonna be cool. Another point that was important for me is the way how it handles event loop. So I guess it's pretty familiar example of event loop, how it works. So we set timeout, we just move printing of line in the ends. Even we declared it here, and even timeout is 0. So we'll get it in the ends. And it's all about JavaScript. It's about the fact that JavaScript is asynchronous, and we have many asynchronous things, AJAX requests, file system operations, input-output operations, events like user input, etc., etc. And well, many things are asynchronous, and sometimes it's a little bit painful to handle all this. That's why we have so many solutions around that. For example, in Node.js, there are some synchronous alternatives for many file system methods. For example, here is an example how it works asynchronously. So we have some callback, and we execute change owner command, specifying the path to folder, user ID, group ID, and what's gonna happen afterwards. Using synchronous option, a synchronous version of this method, we can do it synchronously, and we'll do some logic afterwards, so we can place the result into the variable and call it afterwards. So this approach looked like very good, and I wanted to use it everywhere. And there are some options to do so, which were supposed to fix the problem of callback hell. And actually, yes, the idea is to avoid having like our code like this. And actually, we are gonna talk about generators and async await. When I first started working with Koa, it was written with generators. And the problem was that you had adapt all the libraries, existing libraries, to work with Koa, and it was terrible. It wasn't sufficient, and well, we can say it failed. Afterwards, Koa wrote out the new version of framework, which is based on async await, which is much better because we can handle any promise as with await. So any library which returns us promises gonna work out. So async await, what is it about? For example, we have default HTML5 API for fetch. We can take some data from the remote server, and afterwards we have some kind of monadic promises. So you can see that we can call then once, afterwards we can call them second time, and handle what we got afterwards. And it's gonna work with async await, so we can await the results. So we have some response, which is gonna be fulfilled with this fetch data afterwards. It doesn't fit here, I'm sorry, but closing bracket should be there. And afterwards, we can just do some actions with this data. So it won't proceed process here before we'll get the results. So idea of Koa is that it is built on top of async await. All the middlewares, all roads are async functions, and we can use this API everywhere. So, as I mentioned, Koa is just engine of middlewares, and they have only two things actually, context and callback. So, what's very important, please raise your hands, guys who worked with Express.js. Okay, and who worked with Koa.js? I wanted to ask you, by the way, why have you chosen it? Really? Okay. Okay. What's interesting point there, that's one of the reasons why Koa.js is performant, that it doesn't copy context all the time. It is mutable, and because all our middlewares are gonna be executed one after each other, we shouldn't care about the fact that it is mutable. So we have references to context there. And it's very important fact when you are working with middlewares. And it's actually about the main part of their architecture. So they have shared contexts, they have encapsulated response requests and synchronous executions. So here is example how simple middleware works. So we have some context, we have data about request response in our context, and we can just define body here. So it's actually example of Koa.js application. So far it looks like Express pretty much, and it's good. So let's make it complicated and leverage async await here. So we got a synchronous function, and we can await for something what we are waiting for hardly, and afterwards we can handle the results here and just wait for the next middleware. And it really helpful, especially when you're working with a lot of WebSockets there. It really saves a lot of code. And again, middleware is just context and next. So I described Koa.js, and now it's time to talk about APIs. So Koa.js provides you some problems, not only features. So it should take about concurrency, it should take care about database and HTTP. My biggest mistake was that I assumed it's gonna be fast itself. It was a myth. And the other problem is libraries quality, because when you're diving into libraries for Koa, you can find libraries for everything, like a library for Koa.js GraphQL. I found a bug there, I tried to contribute, and I got my PR approved after 4 months. So it kind of explains the quality of the libraries, and just be ready to write lots of features on your own, because you can find the library, you can rely on it, but it won't work as you expected. I got to idea like, why shouldn't I use Express.js middlewares? I took a look at the APIs, I tried to handle the differences, and it works. There are even libraries which are kind of adapters, which allow you to use Express middlewares in Koa, which is quite good. And well, there is pretty simple process of porting. Like, again, I mentioned the middleware syntax here, and in Express, it's just a little bit different. We have separated request response, and we can just handle it this way. So performance isn't about tools. And another questions, guys, is here someone who was a designer before, who is still designer or works with design in some way? I'm sorry, I guess you should close your eyes, because I'm gonna talk about design. I'm gonna talk actually about architecture design, but well, it's not so obvious when I'm talking about architecture design how ugly it is. So let's start about real problems. First one is database. I started working on the app, and we started scaling, and I realized that, well, techniques we used in big applications, in languages I used before, in frameworks I used before, like in Spring and Symfony and Laravel. Well, we don't have anything to use those like practices for scaling. We had there, we don't have these libraries, and work with database is kind of very wild world in Node.js. So I started looking in cache for database, and I started looking for cache for database for Koa.js, and of course there is nothing. I had to optimize my database requests. Actually, it's device applicable to any technology, and well, please take your database normalized, but not too much performance. Problems were not only because of problems with database, also we had not optimized usage of HTTP and WebSockets. So we had to cache answers for frequent requests. It's not leveraged by libraries for Koa.js. And if you want something a little bit custom, you write it on your own. So be ready if you will pick this technology to do so. We had to do some complicated operations separately, and even it was a microservice, we still had to separate API, and yes, it's called some API optimizations. Also, a useful feature might be queues. Actually, you shouldn't use something specific for Koa because it's just a general conception. There are many technologies you can use for queues, and the only thing you need to do to write some adapter or to port it. And actually, the situation with queues is quite good in Koa.js. And for guys who are not familiar with queues, here's a simple explanation how it can work. So in case of chatbot, for example, we had a situation when we had to handle a chatbot with Koa.js. So we got some request from user, and it was a booking of flight. And we got a request like, okay, I agree, please book this particular flight from city A to city B. And it's kind of complicated operation when it comes to business logic. So we need to respond to our user like, we are working on that because it's not something we can do only with our server because we rely on third-party APIs. We rely on availability of some tickets because we can send a request, we can get information that while the user was waiting, price changed or something like that. So idea was to send user a response that's, okay, guy, friends, we are working on your request. Please take patience and keep calm and everything gonna be fine. Afterwards, we were working on process of booking. It usually had several requests to different providers to handle purchase of the tickets. And afterwards, we can send, it was possible to send another request, response to the user, message to the user like, okay, guy, we purchased your tickets, but we are working on some additional stuff like generating PDF, saving his data into database. And afterwards, we provided him additional information. So it's quite good, and it allows you to avoid the situation when you have to care about how to respond user as fast as possible with a big amount of business logic. So it was one of the biggest and most important improvements we had in our app. So what we can use queues for? We can use them for APIs. We can use them for input-output operations. We can use them for complex database requests. For example, some applications when, especially financial ones, when you have to prepare some reports to administrators, you shouldn't do it like on demand. You can put it into queue and do it afterwards. The same is about sending emails. It's quite easy task to send one email, but if we are talking about thousands, it becomes a little bit more complicated. So another point is caching. I also just tried to simplify things. What we have done, we created several layers of cache. We created a cache for API. For example, user requested some tickets which were requested several minutes ago. And we can assume that prices are going to be similar. Probably they're going to be different, but we can, I mean, they may be different, but not too much. The common idea is the same, so we can save some time, server time and response, just the same data. And afterwards, user will start booking process and we can notify him like, okay, guy, since the last viewed price a little bit changed. Another point is database cache. When you should load a lot of data, you have a lot of joins in your database. It also might appear useful for you, and it does pretty much the same like here, but for example, you can come to some specific database request from different configuration of those this data in response from user. So it also might be very useful. And I wanted to, you know, when I'm working on slides, I create such to-dos, and I wanted to replace it, but it explains the situation pretty good. So if you will work with cache in Koa.js, it will be your problem. and there is nothing useful in the ecosystem. So also I wanted to talk about error handling. I guess it's pretty much everyone does, sometimes. And actually, some of my stuff I'm using for debug. Oh, I'm sorry, error handling. Actually, it's applicable not for Koa.js only, but for Koa.js either. So I'm using Morgan as extended login. Logger I'm using forever to restart my applications when something went wrong. It's very cool if you are using some VPS to host your application, and it really helps. I used Node domain to debug my Node.js code. Unfortunately, it got deprecated, but currently it can be easily replaced with Zone.js, which is also very helpful. Probably some of you faced it in Angular 2 and newer. Another big problem is security in our applications. And when I mentioned that my point was to create an app from scratch and have whole control on the application, I forgot that I work with security either. I expected that I'm a good at security, but it's taken some time to get a little bit deeper. So here are some hand-picked libraries I'm using for security in my apps. Due to my architecture, I had to work with critical user data, so I had to care about CSRF to avoid such kind of attacks. I used bcrypt to encrypt passwords, which is kind of standard. I used escape HTML in order to escape user inputs. The same I does with validator.js. Even data is validated on front end, it makes sense to validate it on backends. Even it's not dangerous, it's really helpful. Another big issue, which is pretty terrible, that you need to remember all those headers you have in your applications and what you need to disable, what you need to change. And there is some really cool library. I strongly recommend you using it. It's called Helmet, and it cares about some default. It provides you some default sets of headers configuration, which is kind of safe. And also there is very cool project that's called Node Security Project. I'm sorry, it's called Node Security Project, and it provides you kind of repository, and which consists from evaluations, like which library is safe, which library isn't, which library is not tested, and they provide you a console-wide interface which you can use in order to validate all your node modules folder in order to verify do you have some dangerous libraries installed or not. So it's pretty much it. Thank you for coming, guys, and feel free to ask any questions. I'm staying here, so also you can catch me on the kitchen afterwards.